I'm 80 years old, and I need to tell you something that's going to make you uncomfortable. Something your parents won't say, your teachers never taught you, and every self-help book carefully dances around. I was kind my whole life. Genuinely, deeply, reflexively kind, and it nearly destroyed me. Now, before you close this thinking, I'm about to tell you to become selfish or cruel. Stop. That's not what this is about. What I'm about to tell you is far more nuanced and far more important than that. Because the truth is, kindness without boundaries isn't kindness at all. It's self-abandonment dressed up as virtue. And I spent 60 years learning that lesson. Let me tell you when I first realized something was wrong. Not at 70, not at 60. At 42 years old. And it took me nearly 4 more decades to understand what that moment was really trying to teach me. It was 1987, March 23rd. A Tuesday. I remember because it was my birthday and I'd taken the day off work, which was rare for me. I was planning to do something special, maybe visit that art gallery I'd been wanting to see for months, treat myself to lunch somewhere nice. Just one day for me. At 6:47 a.m., the phone rang. My sister Linda. Her voice was shaking. Her husband had left her the night before and she needed me to come over right away. She couldn't be alone. She was falling apart. I went. Of course I went. I spent my birthday on her couch, holding her while she cried, making her tea, listening to her talk in circles about what went wrong. I didn't mention it was my birthday. That seemed selfish. She was in pain. My little gallery trip could wait. It could always wait, couldn't it? I got home at 9 p.m. My husband George had already eaten dinner. The leftover birthday cake he'd bought sat on the counter, one candle stuck in it, unlit. He looked at me and said, "Linda again?" Not angry, just resigned. And I saw something in his eyes that I didn't understand then. Something like disappointment. Not in Linda. In me. "She needed me," I said. "Everyone always needs you, Margaret," he replied. "When do you need you?" I didn't have an answer. I thought he was being dramatic. I thought I was being a good person, a good sister. What I didn't understand was that I'd been bleeding myself dry for other people for so long that I'd started to believe I didn't matter unless I was useful to someone else. But here's the thing, nobody tells you about being endlessly kind. It doesn't just hurt you, it hurts the people who actually love you. Because they watch you give and give and give to people who take and take and take. And there's nothing left for the people who would actually cherish it. George died in 2003. Heart attack at 72. We had 48 years together. And you know what haunts me? Not the time we spent together, the time we didn't. All those evenings I wasn't home because someone else needed something. All those weekends I cut short because my mother called, or my brother needed help moving, or a friend was having a crisis. George never complained. Not really. He was patient and understanding, and he loved me. But I can count on one hand the number of times in our marriage when I chose him over someone else's emergency. And here's the brutal truth I learned too late. Most of those emergencies weren't emergencies at all. They were just people who'd learned that if they called me, I'd drop everything. Because that's what being kind meant to me. Being available, being useful, being needed, never saying no, never disappointing anyone, except I was disappointing people, the ones who mattered most. I just couldn't see it. Let me tell you about our 25th wedding anniversary, 1990. George had planned something special. He'd saved up for months, booked us a weekend at a bed and breakfast 3 hours away, just the two of us. He'd arranged everything, even got our neighbor to watch our youngest son, who was still in high school. The day before we were supposed to leave, my friend Janet called. She was going through a rough patch with her teenage daughter, lots of fighting, lots of tension. She asked if I could come over and talk to her daughter, maybe help mediate. She said I was so good with kids that her daughter might listen to me. I said yes. I told myself it would just be a few hours, but her daughter didn't want to talk. She was angry and defensive, and the whole thing turned into this multi-hour ordeal. By the time I got home, it was 11 p.m. George was sitting in the living room, our suitcase by the door, still packed. "We should leave early tomorrow," he said quietly. "Beat the traffic." But the next morning, Janet called again. The situation had escalated overnight. Her daughter had run off, come back, now wouldn't come out of her room. Could I please come back? I looked at George. I looked at our packed suitcase. And I made a choice that I've regretted for 33 years. I went to Janet's house. George unpacked the suitcase without a word. We never rescheduled that trip. He never brought it up again. And I told myself it was fine, that he understood, that there would be other anniversaries. There were other anniversaries. But we never took that trip. And every year on our anniversary after that, I could see it in his eyes. The memory of me choosing someone else's family drama over our marriage. Over us. When George died, I found a journal in his desk drawer. He'd kept it sporadically over the years. And there was an entry from that weekend in 1990. It said, "Margaret went to Janet's again today. It was supposed to be our weekend. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to be patient. But I'm starting to feel like I married a woman who belongs to everyone but me. I don't know how to compete with the whole world for my own wife's attention." I sobbed when I read that. Sobbed like a child. Because he was right. And he'd felt that way for years, and I'd been too busy being everyone's hero to notice that I was failing the one person who'd actually chosen to spend his life with me. My daughter Rachel, she's 53 now. Last year she said something to me that cut deeper than any blade. We were having lunch, and she mentioned that she'd stopped calling me when she had good news years ago. Just stopped. "Why?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Because you were never fully there, Mom. I'd call to tell you something exciting, and within 5 minutes you'd remember something you had to do for someone else. You'd cut the conversation short. Or Aunt Linda would call, and suddenly my news didn't matter anymore, so I just stopped sharing. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend myself. But I couldn't, because she was right. I remember one specific instance that Rachel had probably forgotten, but I never did. She was 16, had just gotten her driver's license. She was so proud, so excited. She called me at work to tell me, her voice practically vibrating with joy. And I was happy for her, I was. But I was in the middle of helping a co-worker who was having computer problems, and I said, "That's wonderful, honey. Listen, I'm helping Susan right now. Can I call you back tonight?" I never called back. By the time I got home, it was late, and Rachel was already in bed. The next morning, she didn't mention it, and neither did I. The moment had passed. That happened over and over again, hundreds of times, thousands maybe, little moments where my children needed their mother to be present, to be excited, to prioritize them. And I was always somewhere else, helping someone else, being kind to someone else. I have 3 children, Rachel, Michael, and James. And I cannot tell you the last time any of them called me just to talk. They call on birthdays. They call on holidays. They visit out of obligation. But that closeness, that intimacy that some mothers have with their adult children, I don't have that. And it's not because I wasn't kind to them. It's because I was kind to everyone equally. And children don't want equal kindness. They want to matter more. They deserved to matter more. Here's what I wish someone had told 25-year-old Margaret. the young woman who thought saying yes to everyone made her good. Being kind to everyone means being special to no one. I had a best friend growing up, Catherine. We'd known each other since we were 7 years old, did everything together, told each other everything. She was my person. We used to joke that we were sisters in another life, that we'd found each other again in this one. In 1994, she got sick, breast cancer. She called me in tears after her diagnosis, said she was terrified, said she needed me. I showed up. I drove her to appointments, brought her meals, sat with her during chemo. I was there, but I was also there for everyone else. My neighbor who needed help with her kids, my coworker who was going through a divorce, my church group that needed someone to organize the fundraiser, my cousin who needed someone to help plan her daughter's wedding. I spread myself so thin that I was technically everywhere, but meaningfully nowhere. Catherine died in 1996, 2 years from diagnosis to death. And about 6 months before she passed, she said something I'll never forget. We were sitting in her hospital room, and she looked worse than I'd ever seen her. The chemo had ravaged her body. She was weak, frail, barely recognizable as the vibrant woman I'd known my whole life. She said, "Margaret, you're the kindest person I know. You'd give your last dollar to a stranger. But I needed my best friend these last 2 years, and I got a volunteer instead." I was stunned, hurt even. I'd been there, hadn't I? I'd shown up. But showing up isn't the same as being present. And being present for everyone isn't the same as being truly there for someone. I tried to defend myself. I said, "Catherine, I've been here. I've driven you to every appointment. I've brought you food. I've sat with you." And she smiled sadly and said, "You've been physically here. But you're always thinking about the next thing you have to do for someone else. Last week you sat with me for an hour and checked your phone 14 times. I counted, because I wanted to see if you'd notice I was counting. You didn't." She died 3 weeks after her 51st birthday, and I realized, far too late, that I'd been so busy being kind to the world that I'd failed the person who actually needed me to show up differently, to prioritize her, to say no to other people so I could say yes to her in a way that mattered. I sobbed when I read that, sobbed like a child, because he was right, and he'd felt that way for years, and I'd been too busy being everyone's hero to notice that I was failing the one person who'd actually chosen to spend his life with me. My daughter Rachel, she's 53 now. Last year she said something to me that cut deeper than any blade. We were having lunch, and she mentioned that she'd stopped calling me when she had good news years ago. Just stopped. "Why?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Because you were never fully there, Mom. I'd call to tell you something exciting, and within 5 minutes you'd remember something you had to do for someone else. You'd cut the conversation short. Or Aunt Linda would call, and suddenly my news didn't matter anymore, so I just stopped sharing. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend myself. But I couldn't, because she was right." At her funeral, her sister pulled me aside. She said, "Catherine talked about you a lot in those last weeks. She said she wished she'd had the courage to tell you years ago that you were spread too thin, that she missed having you all to herself sometimes, the way it was when you were kids." That's when I started to understand. But understanding something and changing your behavior are two very different things. I'm 80 years old. I've been in therapy for 6 years. 6 years. At 74 years old, I finally walked into a therapist's office and said, "I don't know who I am when I'm not helping someone." And my therapist, Dr. Chen, she looked at me and asked the most devastating question anyone has ever asked me. "Margaret, do you think you're kind?" Or do you think you're afraid? I didn't understand at first. Afraid of what? Afraid that if you're not useful, you're not valuable. Afraid that if you say no, people will leave. Afraid that who you are without the helping and the giving and the sacrificing isn't enough. I cried for an hour in that office because she was right. I wasn't kind. I was terrified. Terrified of conflict. Terrified of disappointing people. Terrified that my worth was conditional on my usefulness. And I'd built my entire identity on being the person who never said no, who always showed up, who always helped. Because as long as I was needed, I couldn't be abandoned. Except I abandoned myself instead. Dr. Chen gave me homework that first session. She told me to go home and write down every time I said yes to something in the next week, and next to each yes, write down why I said it. Was it because I genuinely wanted to help and had the capacity? Or was it because I was afraid of what would happen if I said no? I filled 11 pages in 1 week. Out of 47 times I said yes to something, only 3 were because I genuinely wanted to and had the capacity. 3. The other 44 were rooted in fear. Fear of disappointing someone, fear of seeming selfish, fear of conflict, fear of being seen as unkind. One of those yeses was to my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. She's 72, perfectly healthy, perfectly capable. She asked me to drive her to the grocery store because she didn't feel like driving. Not because she couldn't, because she didn't feel like it. And I said yes, even though I was exhausted, even though I had my own errands to run, because saying no felt cruel. I sobbed when I read that. Sobbed like a child. Because he was right. And he'd felt that way for years. And I'd been too busy being everyone's hero to notice that I was failing the one person who'd actually chosen to spend his life with me. My daughter, Rachel. She's 53 now. Last year, she said something to me that cut deeper than any blade. We were having lunch, and she mentioned that she'd stopped calling me when she had good news years ago. Just stopped. Why? I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Because you were never fully there, Mom. I'd call to tell you something exciting, and within 5 minutes you'd remember something you had to do for someone else. You'd cut the conversation short. Or Aunt Linda would call, and suddenly my news didn't matter anymore, so I just stopped sharing. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend myself, but I couldn't, because she was right." Another yes was to my son James. He asked me to babysit his kids last minute because he and his wife wanted to go out, which sounds reasonable, right? Except this was the 4th time that month, and I had a doctor's appointment I'd been trying to get to for weeks. I canceled my appointment. Again. The pattern was everywhere once I started looking for it. I was saying yes to everything and everyone, not out of genuine generosity, but out of compulsion. Out of a deep, paralyzing fear that if I stopped being useful, I'd stop mattering. I'm 80 years old and I have acquaintances everywhere. People who think I'm wonderful, people who call me when they need something, people who speak highly of me at parties. I'm on the prayer list at church. I'm the first person people think of when they need a favor, but I have almost no one who really knows me, because I never let anyone get that close. I was too busy performing kindness to actually be intimate. Real intimacy requires vulnerability. It requires saying, "I can't help you today because I'm struggling." It requires admitting you have limits. It requires sometimes putting yourself first. And I never did any of that. I never let anyone see me as anything other than capable, available, endlessly giving. So people loved the role I played in their lives, but they didn't love me. How could they? They didn't know me. My son Michael, he got married 8 years ago. His wife Emily is lovely, smart, kind, successful. They have 2 children, my grandchildren. Grace is 6 and Thomas is 4. About a year ago, Emily asked if I could watch the kids one Saturday. She and Michael needed a date night. Of course I said yes. But then my neighbor Barbara called. She needed a ride to a doctor's appointment that same day. And I said yes to her too, thinking I could do both. I couldn't do both. I had to cancel on Emily last minute. Told her I had a conflict. She said it was fine, that they'd figure it out. Her voice was pleasant, understanding even. But Michael called me the next day, and he wasn't angry. He was just tired. "Mom," he said, "Emily didn't really need you to watch the kids. We could have hired a babysitter. She was trying to give you more time with your grandchildren. She knows we don't see you much. She was trying to help." "I had to help Barbara," I said. "You always have to help someone, Mom. Someone who's not us." There was a long silence on the phone. Then he said something that broke my heart. "Do you know Grace asked me last week if you don't like her? She sees other kids with their grandmas, how close they are. And she barely knows you, not because you're not around. You are sometimes, but because when you're here, you're not really here. You're on your phone texting someone about some favor they need. Or you're cutting visits short because someone else needs something. And she can feel it, Mom. Even at 6 years old, she can feel that she's not your priority." I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that wasn't true. But it was true. My grandchildren are strangers to me. Not because of distance. They live 20 minutes away. But because I've been too busy being kind to everyone else to build a relationship with them. Last month was Grace's 6th birthday party. I arrived late because I'd stopped to help a friend set up for a garage sale. By the time I got there, they'd already done cake. Grace's face fell when she saw me walk in after. Emily tried to salvage it, suggested we do a second round of happy birthday so I could be part of it. But Grace said no. She said, "It's okay. Grandma's busy. She's 6 years old, and she's already learned that she doesn't come first, that she'll never come first. Here's what no one tells you about pathological kindness, and yes, that's what it is when it's compulsive, when you can't say no, when you prioritize everyone's needs above your own and your family's. It's pathological. It looks like virtue. It feels like goodness. Everyone praises you for it. You get to feel needed, important, valuable. But it's a slow form of suicide. You give away your time, then your energy, then your peace, then your joy, then your health, then your relationships. And at the end, you look around and realize you built a life where you matter to no one, specifically because you tried to matter to everyone generally. I have high blood pressure, chronic anxiety, insomnia. I take 4 different medications just to keep my body functioning at a basic level. My doctor told me 5 years ago that my stress levels were dangerous, that I needed to slow down, set boundaries, learn to say no. I nodded. I agreed. I said I would. I didn't. Because changing this pattern would require me to face the terrifying question, who am I if I'm not helping people? What is my value if I'm not useful? I'm 80 years old and I still struggle to say no. Just last month, my church asked if I could coordinate the holiday food drive. It's a massive undertaking, weeks of work, dozens of hours of organizing, coordinating, managing volunteers, sorting donations. And I'm tired. My body is tired. My mind is tired. I want to spend the holidays with my family, trying to build some connection with my grandchildren before it's too late. I said yes. Because even now, even after everything I've learned and lost, some part of me still believes that my value is in my usefulness. That if I stop giving, I'll stop mattering. My therapist asked me recently, "Margaret, what would happen if you said no?" "They'd be disappointed," I said. "And then what?" "They'd find someone else." "And then what?" "Life would go on." Would they stop loving you? And that's when I realized the people who would stop loving me for setting a boundary never loved me in the first place. They loved what I did for them. That's a hard truth to swallow at 80 years old. That most of the people I've exhausted myself for over the decades didn't actually care about me. They cared about my availability, my usefulness, my inability to say no. My sister Linda, the one I spent my 42nd birthday with, the one I've dropped everything for countless times over the years. Do you know what she said when I told her I couldn't help her move last year because I was recovering from a minor surgery? She said, "Really, Margaret? I thought I could count on you." Not, "Oh my God, are you okay?" Not, "What can I do to help you?" Just disappointment that I wasn't available to serve her needs. That's when I realized our relationship had been transactional for decades. I gave, she took. And the moment I couldn't give, I became an inconvenience. I'm 80 years old, and I'm just now learning the difference between people who love you and people who use you. Real kindness, the kind that actually matters, isn't about being available to everyone all the time. It's about being fully present to the people who matter most. It's about quality, not quantity. It's about depth, not breadth. It's about understanding that your time and energy are finite resources, and you get to choose how to spend them. You're not a public utility. You're a human being with limits, needs, and the right to prioritize your own life. My mother, God rest her soul, she died in 1999 at age 87. And about a week before she passed, she was in and out of consciousness, but she had one moment of clarity. She grabbed my hand, and her grip was surprisingly strong for someone so close to death. She looked me right in the eyes and said, "Margaret, stop trying to save everyone. You can't, and you're losing yourself trying." I thought she was delirious. I patted her hand and told her to rest. But she wasn't delirious. She'd watched me my whole life, giving myself away piece by piece, and she knew exactly where it would lead. Here I am, exactly where she feared I'd be. 80 years old, surrounded by people who need me but don't really know me. Estranged from my own children, not because of cruelty or abuse, but because of absence disguised as selflessness. You're young. You're sitting there maybe thinking, but being kind is good. Helping people is good. And you're right, it is. But let me ask you something. Who are you helping, and why? Are you helping because you genuinely want to and have the capacity to? Or are you helping because you're afraid of what happens if you don't? Are you helping the people who would help you back? Or are you helping people who've learned to take advantage of your inability to say no? Are you present for your family, your real friends, the people who love you for who you are, not what you do? Or are you so busy being kind to everyone else that the people who actually matter are getting your leftovers? I wish someone had asked me these questions at 25, at 35, at 45, hell, at 55. I wish someone had told me that boundaries aren't cruel, that saying no doesn't make you selfish, that you cannot pour from an empty cup no matter how many people are thirsty. I wish someone had told me that the people who genuinely love you will respect your limits, and the people who don't aren't your people. I spent 60 years confusing kindness with people-pleasing, confusing generosity with self-abandonment, confusing love with availability, and I lost myself completely in the process. Let me tell you about a moment that still haunts me. It was 2001, 2 years before George died. Our grandson, Michael's son Christopher, was in a school play. He had the lead role. He was so proud. He'd been practicing his lines for weeks, reciting them at every family dinner. The play was on a Thursday evening. George and I had committed to going. Christopher had made us promise. He wanted us in the front row. The day of the play, an old friend from college called. Her name was Diane, and I hadn't spoken to her in probably 5 years. She was in town for one night only, passing through on a road trip. Could I meet her for dinner? I should have said no. I had a commitment. My grandson was counting on me. But Diane sounded so hopeful, and I thought, well, the play is at 7 p.m. I could meet Diane for an early dinner, 5 p.m., be done by 6:30, still make the play. Except dinner ran long. Diane wanted to catch up on everything. She ordered dessert. She was in no hurry, and I didn't want to be rude, didn't want to rush her, didn't want to make her feel like I had somewhere better to be, even though I did. By the time I looked at my watch, it was 7:15. The play had already started. I'd missed Christopher's big entrance, his opening scene, probably half the show. George had gone without me. He'd saved me a seat until the last possible minute, then gave it to another parent who was standing in the back. I arrived during intermission. Christopher saw me come in. I watched his face change from hopeful to disappointed in the span of a second. I'd promised I'd be there from the start. And I'd broken that promise for someone who I hadn't even spoken to in 5 years, and likely wouldn't speak to for another 5. After the play, Christopher wouldn't look at me. When I tried to hug him and apologize, he pulled away. He was 9 years old. George drove home in silence. Finally, he said, "One day, you're going to realize that the people who actually love you have been waiting their whole lives for you to choose them first. And by the time you realize it, they'll have stopped waiting." He was right. Christopher is 32 now. We're cordial, but we're not close. And that night, that stupid, thoughtless choice to prioritize a casual acquaintance over my grandson's important moment, that was just one of hundreds of similar choices I made. Each one seemed small at the time. Each one I justified. Each one eroded the foundation of my relationships just a little bit more, until there was nothing left. My daughter Rachel, she and I have been working on our relationship. It's slow. There's a lot of hurt there, a lot of missed moments that we can't get back. But she's been patient with me as I try to learn, at 80 years old, how to actually be present. She told me something last month that gave me hope, but also broke my heart. She said, "Mom, I'm learning to set boundaries with my own kids, to say no when I need to prioritize my marriage over my friend's drama. And it's hard because I watched you say yes to everything, and I thought that's what good mothers did. But I'm realizing that good mothers show their children that they matter more than strangers. That family comes first. That it's okay to protect your peace." She paused, then added, "I'm teaching my daughter something you never taught me, that their needs matter, that they don't have to earn love by being useful, that they're valuable just because they exist." I started crying, because she was right. I'd taught my children through my actions that everyone else's needs came before theirs, that being kind to strangers was more important than being present for family, that you prove your worth through endless service. And Rachel had to unlearn all of that as an adult. She had to go to therapy, set boundaries, learn that she matters. Things she should have learned from me. Things I should have modeled for her. She's 53 and she's learning what I'm only just now understanding at 80. But at least she's learning it now, while her husband is still alive, while her kids still live at home, while she can still build something different than what I built. Her daughters, my granddaughters, they're 14 and 12. And Rachel is teaching them to say no without guilt, to prioritize themselves, to understand that kindness starts with being kind to yourself. I barely know those girls. They're polite to me when I see them, which isn't often. But there's no real relationship there, and that's on me. That's the consequence of a lifetime of putting everyone else first, except the people who should have been first all along. If I could go back to 25-year-old Margaret, the girl who thought kindness meant never saying no, here's what I would tell her. Your kindness is not your identity. You are valuable even when you're not useful. The people who love you will love you on your worst day when you have nothing to give, and the people who only love your generosity don't love you at all. Learn to say no without guilt. Learn to prioritize without apology. Learn that disappointed people are not your responsibility to fix. That's a hard truth to swallow at 80 years old. That most of the people I've exhausted myself for over the decades didn't actually care about me. They cared about my availability, my usefulness, my inability to say no.